Evan Holt always said that lakes remember everything. He used to say it as a joke when he and his brother were kids. Sitting at the dock with their cheap rods and mismatched tackle boxes, waiting for bluegill to bite. But now, standing at the edge of the same lake nearly 20 years later, he wasn't smiling. The water was too still, the air too heavy, and the old pine trees too quiet. Liam parked the truck behind him and slammed the door, breaking the silence. "Same place looks smaller, huh?" he said, grabbing the cooler. Evan nodded. "Yeah, feels different though. Like it's watching. Liam smirked. "You still talk like a poet. It's just water, man." They carried their gear down the narrow dirt path until the ground dipped into soft moss. The lake stretched wide, silver under the dusk light. A mist hovered low, thin enough to see through, yet thick enough to blur the far shore. The forest on the other side looked like a wall. Evan crouched near the edge, dipping his fingers into the water. It was colder than he remembered. "You know, nobody comes here anymore," he said. "That's why I picked it. No crowds, no noise." Liam unfolded a camp chair and looked around. Perfect spot to drink a few and catch something worth bragging about. Evan set up the rods while Liam opened a beer. The smell of pine sap mixed with the metallic scent of the lake. The evening air was cooling fast, sliding down from the mountains like invisible fog. They cast their lines and waited. Ripples spread out, vanishing into stillness again. For an hour, nothing happened. The world was quiet except for the faint buzz of insects, and the occasional splash of a fish they couldn't see. Evan didn't mind. He loved the quiet. The silence made him feel like the lake had something to tell him, if he listened long enough. When the sun began to fall behind the ridge, he noticed something odd. A flicker beneath the surface, not like a fish's movement but something more deliberate, a pulse of light. It faded quickly. "Did you see that?" Evan asked. Liam glanced up from his cooler. "What?" "There was a light down there. Reflection. You're seeing the sunset in the water." "No, it was deeper, like it came from the bottom." Liam rolled his eyes. "You watch too many ghost shows." Evan didn't answer. He kept staring at the lake, waiting for the light again. When it didn't appear, he forced himself to focus on the fishing line. As the night grew darker, the mist thickened and drifted closer to shore. The temperature dropped sharply. Liam zipped his jacket. "We should get the fire going soon." Evan agreed, but before he could stand, his rod jerked violently. "Got something!" he shouted. He pulled back hard, feeling weight on the line, heavier than any fish he'd caught before. The pole bent almost to breaking. Liam ran over, ready to help, but the line suddenly went slack. Evan stumbled backward as the tension released. He reeled fast, but when the hook came out of the water, it was empty. "Must have snapped off," Liam said. Evan checked. The hook wasn't broken. It was straightened out completely, as if something had pulled with impossible strength. They exchanged a glance. Liam tried to laugh it off. "Big one got away." Evan didn't laugh. He looked at the lake again. The water where he'd been fishing was perfectly smooth, no ripple, no sign of movement. That night, they built a fire and cooked near the edge. The smell of smoke filled the clearing, keeping the bugs away. Liam talked about work and city life. Evan half listened, watching the moon's reflection ripple across the lake. The mist was still there, thicker now, curling between the trees. At one point, Liam said, "You remember that story Mom used to tell about this place? The drowned town?" Evan nodded. Their mother had grown up nearby, and always warned them not to swim too deep. She said a small settlement once stood where the lake now was, flooded after a dam collapsed decades ago. Sometimes, she said, when the water was calm, you could still hear the church bell ringing under the surface. Just a story? Liam said quickly, like he was trying to convince himself. No one even remembers the name of the town. Evan poked at the fire. Maybe the lake does. Later that night, when they crawled into their tent, Evan couldn't sleep. The sound of water lapping at the shore seemed louder, like footsteps pacing. He finally unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The mist was so thick it glowed faintly under the moonlight. Something moved near the waterline. A figure. Liam, he whispered, but his brother was asleep behind him. The shape was kneeling at the edge, back turned, hair hanging wet. It looked.
The wind moved over the Louisiana marsh in slow sighing breaths. It carried the smell of salt, rot, and the faint sweetness of decaying reeds. Jonas Reed stood on the edge of the wooden dock behind his bait shop, staring out at the water that had once been his livelihood. The surface was a dull gray mirror, rippling only when the wind shifted direction. He took a sip from his thermos, the coffee long gone cold, and checked the horizon again. The tide was low, the mudflats exposed like bruised skin. Out there, beyond the tangle of cypress roots and cattails, was the place everyone talked about, but no one fished anymore, the hollow marsh. Jonas, you sure this is worth it? Tommy Dale's voice came from behind him, rough and impatient. He was carrying 2 rods and a small cooler, his face red from the heat, even in the early morning. Jonas turned. If the redfish are as big as I've heard, it's worth every drop of sweat. Tommy gave a short laugh. Heard from who? The ghosts you talked to after closing. Jonas ignored him and looked down the narrow channel that led into the marsh. The water there was darker, thicker, as if the mud never settled. We head out before noon, he said. Tide will turn by sunset. We'll be back before then. A third voice called from the truck park near the dock. Before sunset sounds good to me. Maribel Santos stepped out, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She wore waders and a wide-brimmed hat, her dark hair tied back neatly. You two promised me daylight. I'm not staying out there in the dark. Jonas smiled. We won't. I just need to prove this place isn't cursed. Tommy rolled his eyes. You mean prove you can still make a profit? They loaded the small aluminum boat with gear and pushed off into the channel. The engine coughed twice before catching, sending a thin plume of smoke over the still water that the farther they went, the quieter it became. Even the insects seemed to avoid the hollow marsh. The trees grew close together, their roots twisting through the brown water like skeletal hands. Patches of fog drifted between them, pale ribbons under the harsh light. Maribel glanced around uneasily. You said this place used to be open water. It doesn't look like it. Jonas nodded. Used to be a bayou before the hurricanes. The channels shifted, filled in with silt. What's left is half water, half graveyard. Graveyard, she asked. He didn't answer right away. They say a town used to stand somewhere out here before the storms took it. Nobody knows exactly where. You can still find bricks, bottles, bits of fence if you dig in the right spots. Tommy snorted. Sounds like another fish story. They reached a clearing where the water widened into an open pool surrounded by reeds. Jonas cut the engine and let the boat drift. Here, he said. Perfect spot. The air hung heavy, thick enough to taste. The water made soft gurgling sounds against the hull. Somewhere in the distance, a heron cried once and went silent. They set their lines and waited. For a while, everything felt normal. The sun rose higher, burning through the mist. Maribel recorded data on her tablet, measuring salinity and temperature. Tommy told crude jokes that made her roll her eyes. Jonas barely spoke, his attention fixed on the faint ripples across the water. Then, just after noon, the wind died. The marsh went completely still. Even the sound of the boat creaking seemed too loud. Jonas felt a vibration through his line, a slow, steady pull, unlike any fish he'd hooked before. He reeled in cautiously, the rod bending, the line slicing through the dark surface. "Got something big," he murmured. Tommy leaned over to watch. "Probably a gar," but when the hook surfaced, it wasn't a fish. A chunk of cloth came up instead, thick, black, and dripping with foul-smelling mud. Jonas turned it over with the tip of his knife. The fabric had buttons, rusted almost to dust. It looked like part of a jacket, old and heavy. Maribel frowned. "That's strange." Jonas tossed it into the bottom of the boat. "Probably washed up from somewhere." Tommy shook his head. "Ain't no place around here it could wash up from. This water doesn't move." They kept fishing, but Jonas couldn't shake the feeling that the water had eyes. Every ripple seemed too deliberate, every sound too close. The air felt charged, like before a thunderstorm, though the sky above was cloudless. By late afternoon, Maribel said she wanted to head back. "The tide's turning soon," she said. "We'll get stuck in the shallows." Jonas was about to agree when Tommy's rod jerked violently. "Got one," he yelled, standing to reel it in. The line wind, bending the rod almost double. Jonas moved to help, but before he could, Tommy lost his balance. The boat rocked hard, and in one quick motion, he toppled into the water. Jonas grabbed the edge of the boat, but the water had already swallowed him. For a few seconds, there was only the ripple where he'd gone under. Then the water stilled. "Where is he?" Maribel's voice cracked. Jonas scanned the surface. "He'll come up. It's not that deep here." They waited. Nothing. Jonas grabbed the net and plunged it into the water, stirring the mud. The smell that rose was sour and old. When he lifted the net, it came up empty except for a handful of pale reeds and something that looked like bone. Maribel stared at it. "That's not fish bone." Jonas dropped it quickly. He probably swam under the boat, but the water was clear now, clearer than it had been all day. And through it, just for a second, Jonas saw something that froze him, a pale face staring upward, eyes wide, mouth open, hair floating like black weeds. Then it sank, disappearing into the dark. He almost jumped in after it, but Maribel caught his arm. "Jonas, don't, please." He hesitated. The air was vibrating again, low and steady, like a hum coming from beneath the boat. Then, faintly, he heard Tommy's voice. "Jonas, help me." It came from the water itself, bubbling through the surface, too soft and too clear to be real. Maribel backed away. "That's not him," Jonas called out. "Tommy, where are you?" The voice came again, closer this time. "Down here." Maribel started the engine, panic shaking her hands. "We're leaving." Jonas wanted to argue, but when he looked down again, the face was gone. Only his reflection stared back at him. They turned the boat around and sped through the channel, the motor's noise echoing against the trees. The hum followed them, low and constant, vibrating through the hull. Jonas kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see Tommy swimming after them. But there was nothing, only the reeds shifting in the wake. They reached the dock just as the sun dipped below the horizon. Maribel climbed out first, trembling. Jonas tied the boat hastily and looked back once more. The marsh was silent again, flat and black, like nothing had ever disturbed it. That night Jonas couldn't sleep. The sound of the hum lingered in his ears long after he'd gone inside. Around midnight, He heard something tapping on the window. When he pulled the curtain aside, he saw wet footprints leading from the shore up to his porch. He stepped outside, flashlight trembling in his hand. The prince stopped at the edge of the dock, where the boat was still tied. The air smelled like the marsh mud salt, and something sour. Then came the voice again. Jonas. He swung the light toward the sound. A figure stood knee-deep in the water, facing him. It looked like Tommy, but the skin was pale gray and slick, and when it smiled, water dripped from its mouth. "Come back," it said softly. "You forgot me." Jonas stumbled backward, heart pounding. The figure didn't move closer, just kept speaking, its words rippling through the water like an echo played in reverse. He turned and ran, slamming the door behind him. The voice faded, replaced by the same low hum that vibrated through the walls until dawn. The next morning, Maribel returned with the sheriff. They searched the marsh for hours but found nothing. No sign of Tommy, no sign of the boat's disturbance. Not even the black jacket Jonas had pulled from the water. But as they were leaving, Maribel noticed something strange on the surface near the channel mouth, a patch of bubbles rising in a slow, rhythmic pattern, forming circles that widened and vanished. Jonas stared at them, feeling the vibration through the soles of his boots. "It's still there," he whispered. That night, after the search party left, Jonas went back alone. He couldn't stop himself. The hum was calling again, soft and steady. Coming from the direction of the hollow marsh, he took the boat out under a sky thick with clouds. The water swallowed the reflection of his lantern, making the surface look endless. At the center of the marsh, the hum grew louder, almost musical now. The water glowed faintly beneath him, showing shaped structures like walls and door frames half buried in mud. The remains of the lost town. Then he heard them, voices overlapping, whispering his name, hundreds of them. Some sounded like Tommy, others were strangers. "Stay," they said. "The water remembers." Jonas leaned over the edge, staring into the glowing depths. Below him, figures moved, their outlines blurred, their mouths opening in perfect unison. When the boat drifted back to shore the next morning, it was empty. Only the lantern remained, still burning weakly, its flame flickering with each invisible vibration rising from the black water. And for days afterward, anyone who passed near the marsh swore they heard it too, the soft, steady hum, like a forgotten song echoing through the reeds, waiting for someone new to listen. The mountains were closing in by the time Nathan Keller reached the river. Snow lay heavy on the pines, muting every sound except the slow rush of water beneath the ice. It wasn't the kind of place people came to fish anymore. The locals called it the Hollow Run, a stretch of glacial river that had once been full of salmon but now ran black and almost lifeless. Nathan crouched by the bank and let his fingers brush the surface. The water was colder than metal, biting through his gloves. Behind him, his friend Elise stood by the truck, wrapping her scarf tighter around her face. "You're serious about this?" she asked. Nathan smiled faintly. "You wanted a story for your documentary, right? They say no one's caught a thing here for 20 years. Maybe we'll be the first." Elise adjusted her camera bag and stepped closer. "I wanted a human story, not frostbite." He laughed quietly and started unloading the gear. Then filmed a crazy fisherman who can't let go of a river. They set up near a bend where the current slowed into a shallow pool. The ice was thin there, forming gray sheets that flexed with the water's movement. The air carried that heavy, metallic scent of snow about to fall. Nathan had grown up near these mountains. His father used to bring him to the Hollow Run every spring, long before the droughts and the strange stories began. Back then, the river had been alive, the sound of salmon thrashing, the gleam of scales in the sun, the smell of cedar and rain. Now it looked like a scar on the land, dark and empty. They spent the morning casting without luck. Elise filmed quietly, capturing the sound of the river and the slow movements of the rods against the gray landscape. She wasn't much of an angler, but she liked the solitude. The world felt stripped down to its bones out here. By noon, the sky had turned pale silver. The wind came from the north, carrying snowflakes so fine they looked like dust. Nathan's line tugged once, gentle, uncertain. He reeled in slowly, expecting debris. Instead, something surfaced just beneath the ice, a pale shimmer like fish scales, but longer, thinner, gliding just below sight. "What is that?" Elise asked, lowering her camera. "Could be a sturgeon," Nathan said. Though his voice didn't sound convinced, he knelt and peered through the ice. The shape vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving a faint trail of bubbles. After that, the river went silent. Even the wind died around mid-afternoon. Elise wandered a few meters upstream to film the frozen driftwood caught in the current. Nathan stayed where he was, staring at the slow swirl of dark water. Then, faintly he heard it, someone humming. It came from under the ice, soft and low, rising with the water's flow. The melody was simple, almost childlike. He looked around, expecting to see Elise, but she was too far upstream to be making the sound. The humming continued, wrapping around him, seeping into the cold air. He felt his chest tighten, not from fear but from something older, like remembering a tune you'd forgotten years ago. "Nathan," Elise's voice broke through the trance. "You hearing that?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, where's it coming from?" Before she could answer, the ice cracked near her feet. The sound was sharp and clean, like glass splitting. Elise jumped back as a dark shape moved beneath the surface, not swimming but crawling, dragging itself forward with slow, deliberate motion. Nathan ran toward her. The ice bent under his weight, water seeping up through the cracks. For a second, he saw it clearly, a human hand, pale as bone, pressing against the underside of the ice before being pulled away. They scrambled back to the bank, hearts racing. "What was that?" Elise whispered. Nathan's eyes were locked on the river. "Someone's under there. That's not possible." The current, he didn't wait. He ran to the truck, grabbed the long steel hook he used for pulling drift nets, and smashed it through the ice. The water underneath churned, black and thick. Nothing surfaced. The humming stopped. For the rest of the afternoon, they stayed close to the truck. Elise wanted to leave, but Nathan insisted on waiting until sundown. Something about the silence bothered him more than the sound. As the light faded, mist rose from the river, curling through the trees like smoke. Nathan sat on the tailgate, staring at the water. Elise packed her equipment in uneasy silence. Just before dusk, the humming returned, louder now, drifting between the trees. It didn't sound like it was under the ice anymore. It sounded like it was all around them. Nathan stood. "Do you hear that?" Elise froze. Yes, the sound became words, faint, broken, almost like singing. "Come down. The river remembers." Nathan grabbed a flashlight and stepped toward the bank. Elise reached for his sleeve. "Don't," she said. "Please, don't go near it." He pulled away gently. "It's just sound. Probably the wind moving through the valley." He shined the light over the ice. For a moment, the reflection caught something. A figure standing in the middle of the river, motionless. The beam trembled as he raised it higher. The figure was a woman, long hair drifting behind her, her skin faintly glowing under the thin crust of ice. She was barefoot, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned dress, torn at the hem. Her face was expressionless, but her eyes were open, staring directly at him through the ice. Elise screamed his name, but Nathan didn't move. The figure began to tilt her head slowly, as if listening to something only she could hear. Then the ice cracked again, a web of white lines spreading from her feet toward the shore. The water beneath turned cloudy, bubbling like something was rising. Nathan stumbled back, pulling Elise with him. The ice shattered completely, and the river erupted, spraying freezing water across the bank. For a split second, they saw her clearly, not standing now, but rising out of the water, her body impossibly thin, her fingers reaching toward the light. Then she was gone. The river went silent again. They drove away without speaking, headlights cutting through the falling snow. When they reached the nearest town, Nathan called the rangers to report what they'd seen. The man on the other end of the line didn't sound surprised. "You were at Hollow Run?" he asked. "Yes," the ranger sighed. "You're not the first. Stay away from that river. It's not just stories. The old ones say it took the sun once, and it's been hungry ever since." Nathan hung up, unsettled. That night they stayed in a roadside lodge. Elise fell asleep almost instantly, exhaustion and fear catching up to her. Nathan couldn't. He kept hearing the river, not in sound, but in rhythm, like his heartbeat was echoing with the current dawn. At some point near dawn, he rose and opened the window. Snow had covered everything, but in the distance, he thought he saw a faint shimmer, the reflection of water where there shouldn't be any. When Elise woke up, Nathan was gone. His jacket was missing, and the truck was still outside. Keys in the ignition. They found his footprints leading into the woods, ending abruptly near a frozen stream that connected to the hollow run. The snow around the edge had melted slightly, as if something warm had brushed against it. The ranger led the search himself. After 2 days, they found Nathan's fishing rod lodged between two rocks. The reel was spinning slowly, though there was no wind. They never found him. Weeks later, Elise returned to the same spot with her camera, unable to let go. She stood on the bank and filmed the water flowing under the ice. For a moment, she saw a shadow moving beneath it, tall, thin, and gliding just beneath the surface. When she played back the footage that night, the sound of the river was clear. But underneath it faintly was a man's voice humming that same tune Nathan had heard, steady, calm, and heartbreakingly human. And if you listen closely, you can hear the river breathing with him, as if it had finally remembered the warmth of the sun it once lost.